body on your body. I wanna rub my body on your body. I wanna rub and love up. I wanna rub and kiss up. I wanna rub and jam up. I wanna rub and rub up. I wanna rub my body on your body. Rub my body on your body. Let me rub my body.
If you are looking to have your statutory declaration, affidavit of income, identity, damage or lost passport, lost license, tenancy agreement, agreement of settlement, power of attorney, last will and testament, and certification of documents, then you need to visit the Alistair Collins firm, located at the Kellyan Mall, 162 Lamaha Street, in Georgetown, between Camp and Waterloo Street. Alistair Collins is a commissioner of oaths and a justice of the peace. Make certain you visit him or call for more information at 649-6410 or 685-6448 or 503-1451. And there's adequate parking available. Go down to the Alistair Collins firm and have all of your legal issues settled and brought to the fore. Alistair Collins Firm. Contact them at Alistair Collins Firm.
Making the short video for send to you and the viewers and listeners. I'll know we punishing in Guyana. Punishing. Rice gone up, sugar gone up, flour gone up, cost of living just gone up, gas gone up from 3,400 to 3,800. Real hungry days under this installed PPP government. Real hungry days we gone back to. Guyanese? Oh! Real hungry days, real hungry days.
Guess so.
This is why you don't come Leroy party. Bravely right. Yeah, we bad. We need COVID-19 boss. Hold on.
I see you put up. I see you put up the man for your slide. Guess so.
This is why you don't come Leroy party. Bravely right. Yeah, we bad. We need COVID-19 boss. Hold on.
I see you put up. I see you put up the man for your slide.
Hi. Is the State Department currently preparing to engage with the Biden transition team? And if not, at what point does a delay hamper a smooth transition or pose a risk to national security?
There will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. Hi.
Is the State Department currently preparing to engage with the Biden transition team? And if not, at what point does a delay hamper a smooth transition or pose a risk to national security?
There will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. All right, we're ready. The world is watching what's taking place here. We're going to count all the votes. When the process is complete, there'll be electors selected. There's a process. The Constitution lays it out pretty clearly. The world should have every confidence.
Hi there. There will be a second Trump administration. And that guy, Mike Pompeo, said it with such a straight face, right? There will be a second Trump administration. Mike Pompeo stood there in front of all those journalists from around the world, around the US, around the world. And he said that there will be a second Trump administration, even after the votes showed that Trump had lost to Biden. I don't know, man. I honestly don't know. But that's the guy, along with his gang, said to Granger, my friend, David Arthur Granger, that he should accept defeat, even with questionable votes, even though the matter was in front of the court. And they threatened the courts. They did every single thing. I know of judges who were trembling. They didn't want to get their visas or whatever taken away. That is what you call gangsterism, political gangsterism. That is what Mike Pompeo and his gang did to the people of Guyana. That is why the people of Guyana are suffering today. And I say suffering not in a joking sense or whatever, because it's a reality. Look at who they got in charge of a regime. Look at the people that are governing the country. They have no sense of direction as to where they're going. They have no policies in place. Over 515, maybe more persons have died as of the recklessness of the regime, the installed regime. And now, look, Mike Pompeo was very irresponsible, but he knew what he was doing. Why do you think they flew down to Guyana, right? And they talked, Irfan Ali talked. The only thing Irfan Ali was interested in, catfish. Catfish. And he said it with such a serious face. He looked at Mike Pompeo and he said, I want you guys to lift the ban on catfish. That was all on his mind. That was all on his face, maybe mouth. But it was all over him. Catfish. I bet Mike Pompeo on his way back on the plane, he said, what the heck that fat guy? Well, Mike Pompeo is a big guy too. But what the heck that guy was saying? I couldn't understand a word. All I heard was catfish. What is catfish? Catfish. What an embarrassment we have there. And then we have, somebody sent me a message earlier, and they said, Mark, are you going to respond to Jack Dale? Something Jack Dale said on a Looney Tune cartoons program? I don't listen to cartoons. I don't watch cartoons unless I'm watching it with my kids. And that cartoons that I watch, the cartoon and the cartoon characters that I watch with my kids, basically makes a heck of a lot of sense. So why would you want me to watch some fictitious, some fake cartoon character interviewing Jack Dale and talking about Benschop? Of all, me? I'm not going to waste my time and try to break things down for Jack Dale or whatever and respond to Jack Dale and all these things. I leave that to the head prefect, Burke, to do that. I am not going to do that. I have far more valuable time, far more valuable things to think about than to sit down and, do my nails, do my eyebrows, do my hair, and talk about Jack Dale as though I'm in a salon. No. Anyways, look, good evening to all of you. I didn't say good evening to you, but I'm going to say good evening right now. All of you, those of you who are listening underground through 107.1 FM, good evening to all of you, the people in Georgetown, south, east, west, north, wherever you are, on the East Coast, on the West Coast, and so forth, and even on the East Bank. All of you, good evening. And those of you via social media, hey, it's always a pleasure to have you guys on right here. And I can't see some of your comments because I will be focusing on my guest this evening. The guest has a history. He's an intelligent young man. If you listen to him, it reminds me back in the days when we were at Backnam and we heard the older guys talking. The older guys would talk with wisdom. Lots and lots of wisdom. That is this young man. He's kind of like an old man wrapped up in a young man's body. Lots of wisdom from this young man who was once the chairman of Region Number 10. And for those of you who may have attended IFLOT University, I know some of them are watching here. Good evening to you, Mr. Irfan Ali. Good evening. And in terms of geography, Region Number 10, what is it? It's Linden, it's Ituni, it's Kokwani, it's Old England, and other places. And this young man, Sharma Solomon was the chairman of Region Number 10. He is our guest this evening. Lots of things I want to walk through, Sharma Solomon. So we're going to walk through from First Alley. We're going to go till Long in the Valley. We're going to go to Wizrock. We're going to go to Ituni. We're going to go all over this evening with the Honorable Sharma Solomon. Let's bring him on the screen right now. Let's not waste any time. Good evening to you, Mr. Chairman. Former chairman.
Hi, good evening, Mark. Good evening, Mark. You hear me? And good evening to your audience. It's always a pleasure to be on your program. And I do acknowledge humbly your introduction.
Thank you so much.
Before I go, let me just say God is great. Thanks again for having me on. But let me also extend Eid greetings to our Muslim brothers and sisters. We'll be celebrating their Eid tomorrow, in the spirit of just how much test we as a people sometimes are asked to commit to. So
thank you.
Thanks for having me on tonight, Mark.
You're welcome, sir, and thanks for being on. I know you're a busy man, looking sharp as always. My next lifetime, just give me the ingredients, whatever you do to stay fit. I'd love to have that.
Every now and then get out of the politics. Keep the social activism going, Mark. It helps,
I try that sometimes, Mr. Solomon. I try that sometimes. I don't know, man. Maybe I need to get out of the politics. Too much of an addiction.
No. That's just a joke, by the way. It's difficult to get out of this. This which is shaping and giving direction not only to the nation, but individuals. I mean, you just mentioned how tough some people have found living in Guyana today. So the politics remains not only relevant, but it's part of who we are as a people with regards to how we want to not only individually, but collectively shape our country. So I hope that we pay attention to the politics. So that was just a joke, all right?
Well said, Mr. Sharma. Sharma Solomon, our guest this evening. When you were a little boy growing up, at any point in time, did you stop and say to yourself that you, Sharma Solomon, would like to become a community leader, a politician, maybe one day president of Guyana, or a football player? I know you're big into football. What happened? You got into politics.
I think, like I said earlier, Linden Region 10, I think the dynamics of the history of how this community came together, it was so structured that it was built around an entire structure that was called the bauxite industry. So I think the way that was shaped, and I always refer to the book by Obida Kwamina of the making of the bauxite worker, the making of the mine worker to be exact. When you look at how Region 10 and Linden in particular came together with the bauxite strikes and the way people stood up for the things that they believed in, the shaping historically of this community and the social dynamics that went into that shaping, including the unions and just that sort of resistance movement coming through the 80s. I think that sort of spirit caught on, not only to myself, but an entire generation. So it was easy for not only myself, but a bunch of younger people who came through that sort of dynamics of the shaping of Linden and Region 10 to pay attention to those struggles, pay attention to the shaping of our community. So it wasn't difficult when certain things affected the community when called upon, that one will feel the desire first to be a part of it. They say there are 3 levels of struggle. So that desire is to first feel passionate that something is wrong and we should do something about it. And then I was taken to the social activist aspect of it, which is As you feel that way, then you speak about it. That's the second way of struggling. And I think in the very early stages, that's where I started out, penning letters to the editor about issues affecting first my community in terms of employment and just the state of young people. But I think the third state of any struggle is that you must get involved to do something about it. And I think that's where my political activism started. When you looked around the community, there was so much affecting the people that one is driven to take action with regards to how we bring representation on behalf of these people and the issues affecting them. So you ask why we get involved. I think the conditions of our communities that we live in is in itself a provocation of why we should get. It provokes you. It promotes a response first, as I said, a dislike, to speak out, and then to get to action. In 2011, I think that was the right moment. I think the political dynamics came together, so where we saw an opening up for voices to get involved in that political space. When you had the APNU as a partnership welcoming voices on board. So I believe that was a good opportunity for me to get involved. And here I am, former chairman of Region 10. And I hope that with that involvement, our contributions, as humble as we performed, was welcomed by the community. So yes, that was my political sojourn with regards to 2011 to 2015. I've been out of politics, active politics since then.
You've been out of active politics for a few years, but it doesn't mean that you weren't active behind the scene. You were doing some stuff. You were furthering your studies at the University of Guyana. You have graduated with your degree in foreign relations. Again, I say congratulations. Yep. Thank you. International relations. Yeah. Congratulations to you. And let's begin. Lots of good things happening to you in your life. You've started off by wishing all our Muslim brothers and sisters a happy Eid. Let me extend the same to you, sir, and your entire family, as well as our listeners.
Thank you very much, Mark. I appreciate that.
Yeah. As a young man growing up in Linden, a town that is very close to my heart as well, I'm sure you would have heard about the Son Chapman and so forth anniversary just the other day. What is your take on the Son Chapman? Should more have been done in terms of remembering that day, instead of it just passing with a few people remembering it? But should there have been a massive celebration in memories of those individuals?
I always peg back to the fundamental rights of people. We not only lost citizens, we lost almost 50 of our beloved citizens. The fundamental right of any citizen of the state is the right to life. That's guaranteed in our constitution. Our community, our region, our town, our nation in 64, the 6th of July, lost over 50 of its citizens. And I believe that in itself signifies a recognition. It was the largest single tragedy to occur in the Caribbean. It is the worst massacre to occur ever in this country. I say that not lightly, because even to date, I know families who are still suffering and are emotionally taken away from just being themselves because of the trauma suffered. This community has not properly would have not recovered properly from such an incident. The entire Demerara River for miles was actually in blood. The event was called the River of Blood. Body parts were, it was that graphic. For you to ask, and I think fittingly you did, about how we should have remembered such an event, I think we should never forget it. And I think everything should be done to ensure that there is a remembrance of it and a recognition of how the minds of men sometimes work that could leave for a lifetime the suffering of a people. This country and community of Linden and Region 10, for that period, is not only the recognition of the son Chapman, but the recognition of the history of that period, of a time in our country where we should never return, where the races of this country lived harmoniously, and at times how we can allow bigotry and political differences to expose those wounds. I was privileged to be given the opportunity to speak at this year's Son Chapman commemoration. And that was my reflection that as we are living now in 64, we should not allow those who, with their own personal intention, to expose those wounds. And I believe that is what is the underlying issue that surrounds the son Chapman and makes it difficult for us to put this sort of remembrance to it. But I believe that your point stands, Mark. It should be an event to be noted nationally. I recall as regional chairman, though the excursion to Ordaya at the site where the incident occurred was always looked at. We took a conscious decision at the region to ask for $300,000 in the budget to prepare a site down at Christiansburg, where many of the body parts had been found on that tragic 6th of July 1964 day. So there is that site at Christiansburg that we use this year, and let me commend the RDC and the commemoration committee for ensuring that that event was held. And also people are also allowed to go down to the Ordaya site where the actual explosion occurred. But more
So let
could
me
and
ask you
should be
this.
done.
Indeed, Mr. Solomon. Is there a monument, in case I've missed it, so our listeners would want to know? This is an event that a terrorist act. There are lots of evidence pointing, mind you, in the direction of the PPP of committing that terrorism back in
Well,
when was
you
it?
know what is unfortunate, Mark, and as I said, what we attempted to do, and I am hoping to see it being built on. I take the chairman's commitment, the current chairman, Darren Adams' commitment to ensure that the site identified at Christiansburg is properly and continuously placed in a state of development. For now, you have a location identified. There is a structure that is built. I believe there is effort to do some more development. And I think that in itself will allow the community to appreciate, because now you have an actual location in the community of Christiansburg that can accommodate persons who may have not been told or heard of the Son Chapman, an opportunity to visit a site to now learn about the Son Chapman. So I think that was really the rationale behind having Christiansburg identified and where the site is now. But there is a site at Christiansburg. I know there is a commitment to develop it further. And there is also the site at Ordaya. And I know that there is a structure there that accommodates for the yearly pilgrimage that takes place by the family, where that tragedy occurred. In fact, that terrorist act occurred.
Yep, I'm glad that you mentioned terrorist act. both blown up. For those of you young people who have never heard of the Son Chapman and the terrorist act committed by those cowards, political cowards, the PPP have since denied it, but people are not that silly. People are not that stupid. Terrorism against the citizens. I've heard about this Son Chapman through my late grandfather. I'm not sure if you know him, Terry Murray, the goldsmith there in where is it? Silvertongue, Burnham Drive.
Yeah.
Lots of
Papa
sad
Goldsmith.
stories. Yeah, lots and lots of sad story. Did you say former goldsmith? Your former goldsmith?
I know where to go, Mark.
Okay, because he died. When he died, some folks haven't paid up, so I thought maybe you were one of them. So, so yes, the people of Linden, and by extension, the people of Guyana, young people should know more about the Son Chapman and what happened. Look, I don't know, but it is something that the party, the PNC, should have done a long, long time ago. But that's another story. Let's touch now, Mr. Sharma. As chairman, and as you know, Linden was the breadbasket. Linden carried the entire country in the late 60s and in the 70s, the early 70s. Men and women were rushing to Linden to work. In fact, my dad, being one of them, left the quarantine to go in Linden, where he met my mother. Hence, I was born, right? In the late 60s, in the early 70s, these men just left different parts because Linden, the bauxite industry, was actually carrying the country when others were busy burning the cane fields and all these different things. Do you believe, sir, that Linden deserves better in terms of development, economically and otherwise? Obviously, yes, but why not?
Well, but certainly, Mark. I want to take back to the point that you made about the history of how where we came from and where we are. As a community that is built on the migration of persons looking for a better life. You talk about your parents and family. My own parents and family are from the east coast of Golden Grove, Nabacales, Victoria. So we are the first generation Lindeners. And it is in that spirit of appreciating what was there to be provided by a community with so much to give. So people came into Linden recognizing that there is so much that could be afforded for them as an opportunity for themselves, for betterment, and their families. But what came out of that, the artisans that came to Linden to work, to build bauxite and to build the industry, also not only built for themselves a life, but built for Guyana, an industry that shouldered economically many of the sectors, many of the regions, when financially they were against the ropes. So it is not only say that the people who came got a good life, but their efforts also allowed for that good life to be nationally enjoyed. We can even go to some of the very materialistic things outside of just that which was a national support. For example, when you had the issue of electricity, the excess production of electricity was given as supply to the rest of Guyana. When you talk about the economics of the bauxite industry and its ability to earn, earnings were used to bail out other sectors and other industries. So you had a vibrant community where people in the sectors were employed in the thousands. And then suddenly that was no longer happening. So you can imagine the economic burden, the sort of depression that came with such a reversal of prosperity, prosperity at the individual level, and prosperity as a community that was able to shoulder the burden of many of the issues affecting Guyana. So, what was put in place to deal with that, and what is in place to deal with that, to date, have still not corrected or, in fact, allowed for that very radical shift economically away from the community. So now you have a community that was labeled as the depressed community. So these are not my words. These are words from international consultants who came in under the PVP government through a program called Len and Leap, and identified that in the bauxite industry no longer being able to take care of the community, then what do you substitute that with? And I think for a very long period, because of the neglect force of the bauxite industry and the refusal of the then government under the PVP to ensure that economic programs were put in place to shoulder that burden, you had a community that became depressed. And I think that was so deliberate that you could see even at the level of the electricity, and we could go back to electricity, where the production of electricity was deliberately neglected. Resources removed that produce cheap electricity and taken to other locations. So those were some of the things that also compounded the absence of bauxite and the refusal of the then PVP to ensure that it put into a depressed community the sort of resources that could have expanded growth and development. So in the area of agriculture, for example, Linden is not allowed to feed itself. So food security is absent because we have limited access to loans, limited access to lands, to lease for lands, and things like that. So you've had a systemic neglect of a community that was once proud and held itself high in terms of providence for people in the community and Guyana, to a point where we are now without even food security.
Interesting. Sharma Solomon, former chairman of Region Number 10, with us this evening. Look, Sharma, I know you're big on research and so forth. Can you give us a quick rundown, since we're going through history here, a quick rundown as to what Linden was like, the bauxite industry? And I recall prior to the PPP getting to office on October 5th, 1992, through Dr. Chetty Jagan the late. What was Linden like when the PPP took over then?
I can tell
from
you
an economic
that
standpoint.
the 90s, I wouldn't give out my age. I am not that old, but I can say to you, as an individual, as a youngster growing up, I know we in the 90s attending Mackenzie High School. It was the expectation of every young person that they were going to be employed, or likely that they were going to get a job at the bauxite company. I know that even at the level of Fifth Farm, so this would be around 95, even with the change of government, and you saw the decline in bauxite, you saw the decline in the sector. At the end of my high school period, many of the young men that left high school, and I know I can name quite a few, ventured into the geological aspect of the university life, including myself in 97, because we were still hopeful that mining and bauxite would have made a return in terms of those glory moments. So it was that sort of environment, not only where persons like myself saw hope in bauxite and came through the mining in terms of the spirit of giving back with regards to, as a young person, wanting to know more in terms of the development of the sector. But systemically, and I know our former Prime Minister Sam Hines would try to rebut something like this and say that the sector was already on the decline. Decline, that may have been so, but neglect is what the government placed into the sector. Let me say this way. You look currently at what is being done for a particular sector and the efforts being
For
made with regards to
the sugar industry, billions of dollars being pumped into the sugar industry.
I say so indeed. And you look at the sort of support and the response to bauxite when the need was there for policies by the government to ensure that you had not only a sustained industry, and I can take you back to when the company was first handed over in that transition. You had several transitions that brought us to OMI. When OMI took over the industry, it was almost the biggest sellout when you recognize what OMI sold the industry to Bosai for and what we got out of it. So things like that demonstrated to you the sort of responsible management the government was prepared to give bauxite with regards to any other sector that they are looking to give this sort of support. But it wasn't only the sector, the entire community was built around the sector. So in that neglect of the sector in itself was a neglect of the community. And here ends the aspiration of young people like myself who, as late as 97, were still hoping to see at the university level pursuing geology, pursuing mining engineering, that you can come back to Linden, come back to Region 10, and be part of the bauxite industry or the mining sector in general. So I think when we look back based on the generation of the 90s and their view of bauxite, many people say after that period, bauxite is a dead issue. But right now, bauxite is still beaten in this community. Bauxite is still beaten in other parts of the Demerara River. Bauxite is still providing economic support to this nation without taking from it because it's privatized. So bauxite in itself economically have not disappeared from Guyana, but that impression, because of the sort of neglect, was given by the then government, as though bauxite has became irrelevant. After making so much contribution nationally to the development of Guyana, we were suddenly told bauxite is irrelevant. And to date, bauxite continues to beat. So you have to historically take into consideration the type of government and their relationship to the communities and the sectors. And then you can see the reason why the sort of treatment was meted out, not only to the bauxite sector, but those people, us, the people of Linden Region 10, who depended on those sectors, not only for economic prosperity, but to continue to give the sort of cultural support, economic support to the rest of Guyana. I think if you go to communities across the sugar belt, that is the desire that our brothers and sisters in the sugar belt will relate to you. That they feel the task is theirs to ensure that Guyana is allowed to share in the prosperity based on their ability to give. That is what Londoners always desire. So you asked a question earlier about if I think more should be done for Linden. Of course, because we did so much for Guyana. But Beyond that,
we're stick a pin on that and doing so much for Guyana. Sharma Solomon is here walking us through as to what's happening economically, not only in Linden, but Ituni and Kokwani and those other places.
Region
Rich
10.
bauxite, Region 10. Thank you, sir. Bauxite, lumber, you name it, and other stuff. But yet Linden and Region 10 is suffering. I've noticed somebody made a comment, economic genocide for the people of Linden. 23 plus years the people have suffered under the PPP regime. Do you believe, sir, because you have held leadership position out there in Linden as chairman out there in Region 10, sorry, that there was a deliberate attempt, a racist attempt to ensure that the people of Region 10 were strangled economically and otherwise by the PPP regime?
My response to that, as somebody that held a position that confronted such a mentality, I can say to you it was one where there was absolute unwillingness to give an inch, even to the most basic consideration, to see Region 10 and Linden develop. And I'll tell you why. While we were negotiating for the 21st of August agreement, we made specific reference to have an economic committee to be part of that agreement for the sole purpose that the sort of economic neglect that we saw over the years and reports, research, and information to support what we were saying that was done by the then government from institutions such as Len and Leap to say that some of these recommendations should be put in place so that we can see expansion in, for example, you mentioned manufacturing. So all of this raw material, all of these lumber, instead of bitioning what we had before without regards to the community cutting down trees and shipping out lumber, we should have manufacturing companies. We should have, like in Lima Sands, along the Essequibo River, the Essequibo coast, processing plant to help citrus farmers who are doing pineapples and orange along the highway to start to put that into juice and jams and jellies. So we were conscious that if we don't make that sort of representation and don't have people who we can identify, and that's what styled that committee, to be members of that committee. And I think what was most unfortunate that that committee never got the sort of traction it started. In fact, there were stipends paid to some of the persons identified. So it had started, but we had never gotten around to identifying the chair. And it was so difficult to realize. And again, it comes back to your point. If there was a deliberateness, why would a government make it so difficult to have an economic committee to reason where do we find the economic issues so that we can address them within a national budget for a community that needs addressing the needs so that people can move beyond the depressed state that you have labeled them to be in. So I'm trying to get to your point because you've already said it, of why a government would behave in such a way because of their vindictive behavior. But I'm trying to also demonstrate to you the examples to show where that vindictiveness lies. That even to concede to have the region to be part of the process of allowing the economics that you have identified where those deficiencies are. So in the area of agriculture, tourism, manufacturing, where do we see the government supplementing the needs, infrastructure to ensure farm to market roads are built, like we've seen in other communities, so that we can expand agriculture, for example, where we can build the infrastructure of bridges and roads. Those things were what we were asking for. And when you see that sort of refusal, but you see the willingness in other areas, then your point is made, Mark. There was deliberate marginalization of this community, and it was done because not only how we voted, but because I believe there is a certain composition of how the community is structured. So until we can be proven otherwise, I think we could only conclude your point, Mark, that it was deliberate to make an economic genocide point of forcing people into a certain position in Region 10.
You know, Mr. Sharma Solomon, 47 minutes after 9 o'clock. We still have some time remaining. We want to get into some hot subjects. Of course, to talk about the three martyrs, those persons who were slaughtered under the PPP regime in 2012. But before we get to that, I want to ask, and I missed a specific question, a follow-up question concerning. We know in 2011 when Donald Ramotar was campaigning, he jumped on the stage somewhere there in Linden and lied to the people. He said that they're going to give 3,000 jobs. 3,000 jobs he promised the people of Linden in 2011. Broken promise, of course. Also in 2011, what happened after the elections is that not only did they continue to stagnate the entire region, region number 10, but the PPP stole a seat, a parliamentary seat, from the people of Linden. Of course, that seat was won by the Alliance for Change, AFC. Sam Hines, for so many years, was squatting in a stolen seat. So they basically went after the people of Region 10 economically, politically, and even stealing of a seat. Did you, sir, because you went on to become, after the 2011, you became the elections, you became the chairman of Region 10. How many jobs out of the 3,000 that Donald Ramotar and the PPP promised the people of Region 10, how many jobs went to Linden?
Well, that was an obvious point that you made with regards to the history of treatment. And it was consistent. After 2011, it was amplified, in fact. And that, I believe, is owing to the fact that you made the point of the stolen seat. In 2011, the election results brought in just about 12,000 votes, if I'm not mistaken, Mark, which brought us not only in Region 10 the sort of success of returning the seat that was stolen, but it also propelled nationally the APNU to a position where they had enough votes, along with the Alliance for Change, to make the PPP a minority government first time. That was so embarrassing to the PPP, and I think Ramotar, the then President Ramotar himself, that the sort of policies that we saw immediately after that results of November, in fact, and the preparation of the national budget, the decision to remove the subsidies from electricity in Region 10 reflected the mentality of how the then government felt based on the position that they were placed in. There was nothing logical, nothing that could have rationally said to a government, why, after they would have identified this community to be the depressed community, would they impose a 1,500% increase in electricity? And I must say, this wasn't a suggestion. This had started. This was how stubborn, as much as the people said this was going to hurt them economically. So you ask about the mentality of those who governed before. it was with no regards to the suffering and the plight of poor people, especially in this community, for reasons that I believe the 2011 elections highlighted with regards to them losing not only the seat, but losing the position to become a minority government. Um, how do you justify a decision that not only would have affected the community, but would have socially disrupted people's lives for a very, very long time? And that was the mentality that we had to confront immediately on becoming chairman of Region 10. And immediately after delivering such a embarrassing defeat to the PVP, who were making claims that they were going to sweep Region 10 in 2011, instead became a minority government.
Let me just a point of correction that that one seat that was stolen was in 2006.
2006, yes, it was 2006.
And you are correct that when the elections came in 2011, there was a clean sweep. That clean sweep is not as a result of one individual who was responsible for that clean sweep. It was a collective approach. Yourself and Vanessa Kisoon and others, other community leaders who got together and have said, enough is enough. So when the credit goes for bringing home Region 10, in terms of during the 2011 elections, it's a collective approach, a team.
Yeah, we made that team. We made that team work, Mark, because I think what that team managed to do from 2011, a very youthful team. I mean, persons had questioned even my own experience. I know Ms. Kisoon, who served a term before, was also questioned if she can handle a second term. But I believe not only the youthfulness, but I want to credit the spirit of the time and the opportunity is given for everyone to be able to participate. Myself, who served, as I mentioned earlier, as a social activist, found the desire to get to that third stage of the struggle, which was to get involved and to be a part of the decision-making process. So that momentum, I believe, was taken for granted by the then Ramatar government, that when they brought that imposition for the increase in electricity tariffs, that momentum of people's resistance that reduced that minority government brought more people on board to lend support, more social activists, including yourself, including people like Lincoln Lewis, David Hines, even Freddie Kisoon. We had a wide cross section now of people who bought into that spirit of collectively coming together to challenge those who were prepared to violate our rights. And we peg back those rights to the right to be a part of the decision-making process, Article 13. So moving beyond even 2011 and taking 2012, as we went into that struggle that we dubbed the people's struggle, because the people of Region 10 stood up collectively, again, in that spirit of being part of that democracy that we try to practice now, which is a liberal democracy that promotes inclusionary, consultative, and participatory involvement of citizens. But it transcended beyond 2012, Mark, where, again, not only people like yourself, we took that right into 2015. And as you said, within another collective of momentum, we went straight into victory. And the results of Region 10 will show again where that victory was so resounding that it added to that one-seat majority that we had. So I take your point of the many struggles and issues that we confronted in Region 10 and know that it was never an individual effort, but it was always in that collective spirit. And I believe that's how we will overcome all the issues that are affecting us even now. We have to move back to in fact, 2015, where people were given an opportunity to get involved in participating. And let me just say this, Mark, to the level of participation, as I highlighted the 18th of July and the fact that we went into a struggle after then and people like yourself helped. The involvement even in the diaspora was also pronounced. And I want to say with the engagement of the diaspora, we brought in international support from Congress people and senators and internationalize our struggles beyond the borders. So people like yourself who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure that we had that sojourner mission to New York must be commended. So again, we have never done anything without a collective involvement of people who are prepared to identify with our struggles and to raise the flag of resistance anytime they see oppression raise its head. So
Exactly.
to you, Mark
Exactly.
Benschop, we recognize your efforts in this struggle too.
If it has to be done again, thank you, Sharma. If it has to be done again, we will do it all over again. And that is why we've got to keep our eyes open with what is happening in Linden in Region 10 under this installed regime. Well, let's get back to that electricity hike. After the 2011 elections, it was a minority government. They had to vote in parliament for this electricity hike. No minority government could walk away with victory on that day. But the APNU, I believe it was a APNU then, along with the AFC, supported this electricity hike. How did you feel when members of the opposition that was supposed to be going against that electricity hike voted for it? Of course, they had to retract that thereafter. But how did you feel that your own party voted for such a ridiculous hike?
I believe our representatives in Parliament, Ms. Kissoon and then MP Morian, had signaled that it was not something that the community not only was unwilling to accept at the time, but was unaware of. And I believe that is where we base the fundamental argument, not only to the government who had gotten the support, and it was, however, retracted, but to our own party, that Article 13 extends for the region to be able to be consulted on any decision that will impact the lives of people. I believe when you're in political negotiations, at the time there was a trade-off for the increase in pension and also some other issues that were being looked at. I believe it's important for you to have the involvement. That is the spirit of Article 13. That was my discussion on Sunday at the memorial, that it was the people of Linden and Region 10. In an abstract way, Article 13 is on a piece of paper of the Constitution, and we give that life. We Frankenstein Article 13, if you want to put it that way, because the life that was given to it was to say to any political party, any government, that at the level of the individual, more so the region, as a collective of people, if you're going to make a decision, you must consult. There is even a specific reference that I noted that Article 13 mentioned, with specific reference to the issues that will impact the lives of people. So that wasn't restricted only for the government. That was also a point to be made to any political organization that is going to be speaking on behalf of the people, that you have to take any plan, any deal, any action to those people and to know if it will affect them and how it will affect them. Um, credit to the APNU, you must, is that they were prepared to listen, and they listened. And you had a reversal to the extent where you had the support with regards to the people of Linden and Region 10 not having to endure a 1,500% increase in electricity tariffs that economically would have burdened this community and bring about so much social and economic strain to people who are already strained and burdened. So I don't think that it was any point that needed the sort of convincing except to say it was a bad decision in general and it should not be allowed. And that was the point that was bought on and bought into,
Well
except
said.
by the PPP.
By the
Except
PPP,
by the PPP.
they realized, but they were stubborn, they were vicious, and it became a point where blood started to spill in the streets of Linden, where innocent protesters, innocent individuals were shot, killed. Lots of them were injured. People were tear gassed, kids, pregnant women, you name it. Every single thing happened because of the PPP, because of Donald Ramatar, who was vexed. He was upset because he was actually a minority government and they didn't get a chance to do whatever skullduggery at the at GCOM. Because if it wasn't for folks like Vincent Alexander, who caught them attempting to take one seat that didn't belong to them, that's exactly what happened. So we understand that. So Donald Ramatar was vexed. They were vexed with the people of Linden. Sam Hines was vexed with the people of Linden. He didn't want to intervene. He was stubborn. They sent in the police. The police slaughtered on the night of July 18th. Slaughtered, as came out in the Commission of Inquiry. Slaughtered 3 individuals. Ron Somerset, Shemroy Boye, Alan Lewis, Mr. Sharma, on the 18th, the anniversary, in remembering those individuals, it was a sad day for the people of Linden, for the people of Region 10, for the families and friends of those 3 persons who were slaughtered by trigger-happy, bloodthirsty members of the state, policemen. I don't know. As you reflect, sir,
sad, Mark, not only for those who suffered, but sad, it was a sad day in the history of Guyana. Very unfortunate when the state, instead of meeting again on that principle of Article 13 to have a conversation and discuss how do you ensure that you meet the needs of your people? This is a government that always call themselves a caring government. And instead of meeting with people, you send a killing squad. You imagine, this is the Commission of Inquiry report identifying that on the day of the 18th, you had snipers who were looking into the crowd. How can you justify a peaceful protest action that was rehearsed weeks before? We had several protests. Miss Kisoon and some of the women in black who, in a very small gathering, started protesting since in April. We had many protests as far back as April into July. And on the 18th of July, when we had written to the police, gotten their permission for a 5 days protest action, the first day, that was what was organized. And not by the Commission of Police, because in the report of the Commission of Inquiry, the Commission of Police noted that on the day of the shootings, he was unable to meet with his divisional commanders. He was unable to make contact on 2 cell phones for the divisional commander then. However, the Minister of Home Affairs, according to the Commission of Inquiry report, was in contact with the divisional commander. So you have to understand the motivation that went into the response on the 18th towards people who were peacefully protesting and who had done this several times before leading up to the 18th. I remember vividly as we were on the bridge, a number of us, including Lincoln Lewis and David Hines, it was so shocking that the brutality that the Guyana police force was instructed to terrorize and to bring terrorist action that murdered 3 men, injured several dozen, was one that was perpetrated with ammunition that you go hunting with animals to catch when you're out in the wild. This was what came to us. So when we heard gunshots, we couldn't believe. We were actually approaching from the western to the eastern end to reason. These weren't people that came to reason. These were people who came to kill. We saw bodies dropping. Bullets were whisking past people's ears, including mine. So we were all there, not only as victims, but also we too could have lost our lives like these 3 brothers. Any one of us. Because a state, instead of meeting with people, unleash the coercive arm, which is the Guyana police force, to murder citizens 9 years ago, the 18th of July. And it didn't stop there, Mark, because many people sometimes believe that was the end of the unleashing of terror into the matters that we were discussing as we were discussing with the government to bring about relief on this issue and to come to an agreement which ended up being the 21st of August. Even on the 21st and the 23rd of July, after the 18th, there was a return of more terror. An entire community, Silvertongue, was tear gas. A gentleman by the name of Randy Teller was shot in the jaw. Ray Wills, a healthy man, beautiful family, had his legs almost blown off with a pump action shotgun. This was for 1 month. But you know what was most impressive and what was most commendable? The resoluteness of the people in the face of all of that terror. Young men stood before guns and said, we will not move and we will not surrender. And that became our battle cry. No retreat, no surrender. It pains me sometimes when I know the history and the resilience of this community to see currently the sort of treatment that our people are enduring. And I know that we can find that spirit to overcome because we did that on the 18th of July. We did that for 32 days between the months of July and August until we got an agreement that the government in the first instance was asked to reverse that bad decision that they made, which they did. And today, the community have not endured over $15 billion worth in subsidies that economically the government cannot show where they would have created the economic space for people to be able to deal with such an economic burden. So that was the first victory, notwithstanding the terror unleashed on this community between the 18th and thereafter. But the people's resoluteness also called for the government to be held accountable. And we got a commission of inquiry. You have not had a commission of inquiry in this country in over 3 decades. We got one in 3 days. And that was the commendable effort of the people in staying resolute. That commission found and held the police, the Guyana police force, accountable for murdering those 3 men and held the state liable that they paid compensation inadequately, but nevertheless, in accepting responsibility of paying compensation to those families. Those persons who have been injured, we have continued to encourage and work with them so that they too can receive more compensation because there is an acknowledgement that the state committed a crime against its citizens, and in the process, murdering three of its own citizens. That is how we can shape the 18th of July, which was a most unnecessary and unfortunate event carried out by the then PPP government.
I heard last evening you were on Otto Martin's show, and Otto asked an important question. Compensation, yes. And I recall that the PPP just gave crumbs to the family members of the three martyrs. But the important question Otto, Smallman at Otto actually asked, and I'll ask you this here tonight. What about justice? I know there's justice in terms of compensation. What about the murderers? What about those who pulled the trigger? Some of them are parading still in very senior positions in the Guyana police force. What about justice? Bring those individuals to justice. The coalition has had 5 years in office, albeit there was some distraction through a no confidence motion that could have been avoided if they had listened. But what about justice for the family members of those who were murdered or even those who were injured?
I believe in justice, Mark. The foundation of getting to the sort of, the 18th, I saw persons for the first time attending the memorial service and the reclaim exercise at Bamla. And they, for the first time, some of them got an understanding of the pain and suffering a Jacqueline Boye or a Daphne Lewis, the late Daphne Lewis. I know her son or daughter and her son. The pain and suffering, it's so raw that every time those people go to the gravesite, they break down and cry. They cry uncontrollably. The memorial service that was held that was kept in the afternoon, people cried. People are suffering. There is no financial compensation that can take care of that sort of suffering. So that's the first point I'll make. But added to that, it was embarrassing to see that Roger Luncheon, then head of the Presidential Secretariat, attempted to justify that the estate of those gentlemen were worth $1 million, $2 million, and $3 million each. So to see that as a civil suit was allowed for the tune of $75 million was in itself an attempt to correct that injustice of compensation for us.
Well, let me say this.
Let me go to the justice of those.
In terms of Mr. Solomon, you mentioned, and sorry to cut into you, sir. You did mention that the pittance, and we spoke about that. We highlighted that as well many years ago. The pittance they gave to the family members of these three martyrs and others who were injured, $5,000 US. 5,000.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. That in itself is where the first injustice is.
Yeah. The first injustice was the fact that they went into Linden and brutalized people, slaughtered people, murdered people. That was the first. The first injustice.
Certainly.
Yeah.
But I'm talking from the Commission of Inquiry report. So
Sure.
We know all the injustices before. But I'm saying what came out of the report that says that the state, through the Guyana Police Force, is accountable for the deaths. And
Sure.
for that, the state must pay compensation. I'm saying that when they came to that point, even though they were found culpable by the commission, the embarrassment was to think that the life of these gentlemen was worth, as you saying, $5,000 and $15,000. it was that sort of disrespect that was being explained by Roger Luncheon. That I'm talking about is the first injustice coming out of the report.
Roger
But
Luncheon.
the report itself showed the second injustice, where those who pulled the trigger, those who were responsible, as I mentioned before, if the commissioner of police is unable to be in contact with his divisional commander, then those who were directing the commander, and we see, in fact, we saw in the report where the then Minister of Home Affairs was in direct contact, then that is the sort of justice when we went to the agreement. Our first call for justice was the resignation of the then Prime Minister Sharma, because he was the one that made the bad decision. And then the removal of the divisional commander. And then we asked for
At that
those
time,
who
that
were,
divisional commander was Hickens, right?
yes, Senior Superintendent Hickens at the time, who we had meetings with even before the 18th. And you could have recognized that even though these are professional or should be professionals, we come back to where do we find justice? That they were being directed by people who, with intentions beyond the sort of professional engagement that a professional force like the Guyana Police Force, who do have professional people, should be indulging in. You had a sort of arrogance of, instead of working with communities to see how we can resolve issues, that sort of engagement. So the report identified not only where compensation should have been paid and where that was an injustice as to the amount, but it recognized those who were actually doing the shooting. It identifies by name. Officer Rodney was seen putting bullets into the guns. This is what the report is saying. So justice is there to be pursued, as I said, by those who are injured. They can take up civil cases. We made mention of that in 2013. In fact, we had written to several agencies that we were going to take then Commissioner of Police Leroy Brummel and others to court. But our tenure had finished as the RDC, where we were going to do that on behalf of those who were injured.
Now, let me ask you,
and I believe that could still be pursued.
And those who have been injured, man, you know, I've interviewed a lot of them. I've met the three martyrs, their relatives. One of them was a very old lady. I think you said she has since died, right? Because you took me to
she
some
died
of the
2 years ago.
You know,
she died 2 years
still
ago.
haven't gotten justice. I want to show a photograph, Mr. Solomon. I want to show a photograph, and it is graphic. I want to find out what has happened to this young man.
He was the guy I mentioned earlier. His name is Randy Tello. We have kept in close contact. I haven't seen him for quite some time. And along with Mr. Ray Wills, who also lived in the scheme, this incident occurred on the 23rd of July. So right after the 18th, in fact, the 23rd of July, right after the 18th, the Guyana Police Force, with support from the Guyana Defense Force, actually laid siege to the Wisma communities of Silvertongue and the scheme area. And it is at that point, this young man made mention to me that at point blank range, a soldier opened fire on him and shooting him in his jaw. Not only himself and Mr. Ray Wills, who almost had his entire legs blown out. We had a young man who was shot in the forehead. I don't know if people can remember, he was actually shot in the head and required emergency surgery. So this occurred even after the 18th of July. Our community was a siege was laid on our community. We saw Silvertongue as if it was burning down. with tear. You imagine that an entire community was just tear gassed. People were chased out of their homes in the scheme area. And I can say to you, notwithstanding all that you've shown as graphic as that image is and all that I mentioned earlier, people stood their ground and people were prepared, nevertheless, to ensure that they received the sort of justice that we were in the streets for. Today, have we gotten justice? In the Commission of Inquiry report outlines where we can find that justice. That those who came in to kill and to destroy were the only ones identified during the shooting on the day of the 18th. So, yes, that young man, his name is Randy Telford, to be exact. Not only himself, but we had a few other people who on the 23rd of July that suffered like those who on the 18th of July did. They were literally shot up by both the Guyana Defense Force and the Guyana Police Force.
You know, I'm looking at some of the comments here. People just don't remember. A lot of some people just don't remember what happened in that beautiful town of Linden. They just don't remember in terms of the massacre, in terms of brutalization.
And this particular scene that you're showing, Mark, it
Yes,
was
sir.
at this particular scene that incident actually occurred at the Four Corner
Yeah.
over at Wisma. This was the area that, if you notice, you have the soldiers and the police and those who are there removing the barricades. It was at this particular scene that, you know, those orders randomly came through at some evenings, you know, that this is another point that I want to make, Mark, about structures and how government operates. At no point we should allow any government, as we see an attempt is being made. I was told that the matter is now before the court, of the establishment of any coercive agency that acts outside of the SOPs that they should be acting. And that came out of the Commission of Inquiry report also. That on the day of the 18th, the police force, their actions were not in line with the standard operating procedures that allow them to act as a professional entity. And that is why you could have had sporadically orders being given for people to do certain things like what we just saw on the screen, which is to shoot a young man in his mouth.
You know, Mr. Sullivan, we're looking at the time, man. This is so sad. I have tons of photographs of the injured. I have dozens of interviews with Donald Ramatar, with Sam Hines, with then Acting Police Commissioner Bromell, with then Commander for that division, Hickens, who's a very, very big one now in the Guyana Police Force, a very, very big one. Interviews with everybody, those who were in the bridge and so forth. If ever there's a documentary or a book about this event, because people have to remember it, feel free. I have lots of evidence, a lot of tapes, a lot of photographs.
Mark, I again would like to not only yourself, as you mentioned earlier, the collective spirit of support that we receive. I don't believe we had the People's Parliament in Georgetown, opposite Parliament Building. We had the diaspora support, yourself organizing tremendously for us to have our struggles internationalized. But people recognize where the injustice was. So it was easy for them to appreciate just what we were struggling for and against. And I don't think people should ever take that for granted, ever. You know,
shouldn't take it for granted, Mr. Solomon. We're looking at the time. This is so emotional all around. I'm looking at some of the comments there. People who were injured, man, those who lost their lives as a result of a reckless, murderous regime, the PPP under Donald Ramotar. And today, imagine the then Prime Minister Samuel Hines, the guy who in the PPP stole a seat in 2006 from the people of Region 10. Today, he sits in Washington, D.C. as Guyana's ambassador to the United States of America.
And I heard the interview. I heard the interview, Mark. It was so appalling. It was so disturbing to hear the Prime Minister then be more concerned about missionaries not getting to get about their business, which was to get into the interior. His concern was more about people's access rather than those lives lost. And this was immediately after you asked him the question about those 3 young men who lost their lives. That immediate response came from him that they should get off the road because people are trying to get into the interior. That could not have been more insensitive and disrespectful coming from such an individual that immediately, on record, we have it, that we call for his immediate removal. That was part of our highlight of the negotiations. Unfortunately, we didn't get that, but that is why we moved immediately to have that, because it was so disrespectful coming from the then Prime Minister.
Beyond disrespectful, people should remind him. He's sitting right there in Washington, D.C. Maybe the protest and all these things should go to Washington in front of his house, at least when the pandemic is over, because I'm against large crowds and gathering and so forth. Having said that, Mr. Solomon, look, I want to thank you for your service. I want to thank you for what you have done for the people of Region 10 and by extension for the people of the country, because they would have benefited in whatever way, little way or whatever outside of Region 10. We are hearing that Congress, and we're looking at the time now, we're hearing that Congress should be held soon. Your party, the People's National Congress, will celebrate 65 years on October 5th of this year. 65 years, but there's still no Congress. One can understand maybe because of the pandemic. But even before the Congress is held, we're hearing of some folks who have declared their intention to run. We heard so far, we know of about 3 persons, including the incumbent leader. Let me ask you this. I got 2 questions for you before we go. Do you have a horse in the race, so to speak?
Well, you're asking about hypotheticals, and it's difficult for me to respond to hypotheticals. First, the hypothetical of having a Congress. I personally don't believe Congress will be on this year. I think there are several factors that is relating to that, including, as you mentioned, the COVID-19. But I believe more than anything else, the sort of sentiments that you see exist around the opposition politics and more so the politics of the People's National Congress requires more grounding and understanding where even some of the current leaders stand. And I believe the time does not permit for some of them to take such a chance. People are very annoyed. People are very frustrated. People are very disappointed with the outcome of the 2020 elections and the current situation a lot of people find themselves in. And I don't think no one will want to take the chance at this moment to have an event like Congress with such an uncertainty or with such uncertainties that exist with regards to how people not only view their performance, but view their continued support going forward. So that hypothetical, as you asked, Congress should have been held a couple months ago. It's not. There is no definitive word as it relates to Congress. And I believe in that spirit and in that line, I would take the position on that hypothetical to say in 2021, I don't believe we'll have a Congress. With regards to those who have interests to compete, I believe that's where the first focus lies, in those structures. I am more structural in terms of where I see the party. I take this cue from our engagement in 2011 and how we were able to build the party in Region 10. You had a party with membership of below 200, 300 maximum. And the groups within the region were, if not non existent, not too functional with regards to their ability to get the party and the structure moving. We came in and as a collective, we managed to move the membership to just about 1,500. And this is reflected in the 2014 Congress when we took over 120 delegates, because we had then put in place almost 13 party groups. Now, I'm giving you all this so that you can understand and appreciate that if we don't have a strong, functional party at the level of the individuals, at the level of the groups within the communities, at the level of the region themselves, and then we can move to Congress, then I would ask those who are competing that is where our focus should be, to see how we can repair those structures. I'll say further in 2015, we saw those structures, the effectiveness of those structures being questioned. And to the point that now, in our current state, I'll give Lyndon again as an example, where transgressions on transgressions would occur, and the readiness of people to rebut, to confront those transgressions are not easy to organize, to mobilize, and to challenge those issues that are now confronting them. And I believe that is because we have to work first on building that base. So, no, at the moment, I don't have the position that I hold for any individual, because I believe I want to see, like any other member, those structures allowed to work. Because if those structures were working, Mark, then we would have had a Congress. Because party groups and party in terms of the regions that make up the structures would have ensured that as a national party, your reasoning for a pandemic cannot justify in this world that we live in, where we have rapid crisis on crisis, that we are in pause mode because we cannot adapt to a current crisis. That in itself says a lot in terms of a national party and how its ability to prepare for something as significant as a Congress to decide the way forward for its leadership.
All right, Sharma Solomon here for us, walking us through a little history of Region 10, Linden, the bauxite, the struggles and so forth and so on, the brutality, the murders, all happened under the PPP regime, the dictatorship. It's back. Today, we're seeing what's happening in the region, pittance being given. Lots of folks who don't belong to the region are giving the best lands, big house lots, business deals, contracts, and so forth and so on. Lindeners, people of Region 10, wake up, open your eyes. Here's a final question before we go, and we're hoping that your response will be very brief. You're smiling. I think I don't even have to ask the question since you're smiling. You might as well just go right ahead and answer it. People want to know, Sharma, that they see you as a young leader. They see you as someone, a chairman who was very effective. And we haven't seen an effective chairman, in my opinion, in a long time for Region 10. I don't want to touch on the most recent past chairman of Region 10. I don't want to touch on that because I'll talk for the rest of the night. But I must apologize. I didn't ask about the television station, the radio stations, and so forth in Linden, because these are things These are things that are important. Information being given to the people. It's very important. But yet the Linden, the people of Linden, Region 10, were denied an opportunity to start up a long time ago a television station of its own. Denied under the PPP dictatorship. It was never started up. It was never materialized for God and heaven knows what reason under the coalition government. Maybe we'll touch on that some other time.
No
But
problem.
let me ask you this, Sharma Solomon, if someone says they want you to run for the leadership of the People's National Congress, will you throw your hat in the race, or are you going to still talk about team efforts and all these things? The direct question is, will you throw your hat in the race if someone nominates you or a group nominates you?
I answered this question before. I take the same position as I did before, Mark. My position is we did this in 2014. I'm not new to participating in the vanguardness of the PNC, which allows for members to know that they can be members to leaders. And I wanted that point to be noted, that is the vanguardness. I read a book from Dr. Reed, and I always make this point, who spoke of his days in the trenches in the country and rose to become one of the most recognized leaders in the party. It provides for that. So whether it's a Sharma Solomon or any member, they should not feel that they cannot become leader or should not have the desire to want to become a leader. So that must always be a position that any member of this party, if they feel that they have the ability to lead, should never deny themselves that. And this party doesn't provide for that. Constitutionally, the party constitution provides for you to feel that sense of hopefulness. But as it relates to me personally, Mark, I prefer to work to see we build a stronger party. As I said earlier, I have taken the opportunity to be more personal in how I go about getting people aware and to get involved in political activities. As it right now, I am more professional in that approach rather than political in that approach. All right. And that is
All
my
right.
answer to that question.
I guess that's your honest answer. Team effort, teamwork, and so forth, and not the division that we're seeing and the biting here and the hollering at each other there. It does their support base, the PNC support base, no good at all.
I think damage is being done at every level, Mark. Damage is being done at every level. But I think sometimes people believe that there must be destruction before there is construction. Some people believe that, and that's their right. But there is no denying that damage is being done. And I am a firm believer that there is also equal to that a lot of suffering that must be considered in the wider sense of where Guyana is. And we have to come to a point where we recognize the sort of leadership that is needed in the PNC. And I think that is where our mistake is many times, Mark, that we are focusing on the individual. I believe that our task is to identify the sort of leadership of the party that will allow for us to be able to deal with those challenges that are affecting many people out there that are suffering. That should be our priority. But I can say to you in the interim, a lot of damage is being done, a lot of damage. But some people believe in destruction before there's construction. I want to say that
in law, there's something called contributory negligence. But go ahead, let's hear your task before we go.
Yeah, my task is not to be a contributor to the issues that are causing the sort of destruction. My task is to see how I can work to build at the level of the grassroots the sort of structures. And if people realize that we are doing such a good work, like we did in 2011, like we did in 2015, like we attempted to do in 2020, because we were there in all of them, and they're prepared to lend that support, then we're here to give back that in a reciprocal way.
Good. Sharma, I've got to go. It's been a pleasure to have you on. I see some people teasing me. Gary Greenidge, I don't know which part of the world you are right now, but all of those beautiful listeners and those who would have commented. I've been watching at some of your comments and so forth. You got people laughing at me, Gary Greenidge and others, they're laughing at me that I didn't get a yes out of you tonight. I wasn't expecting a yes, Sharma. I've known you for many years. I wasn't expecting a yes. And people out there weren't expecting a yes from you, I'm sure. But
I hope however they buy in, I hope they however buy into what I'm trying to say, that we have to get our party structures functional so that we can deal with these challenges. I hope they get that.
All right, let's hope that they get that. Those of you guys who are PNC, members of the PNC and so forth. Sharma, don't be a stranger, man. Return. And I have lots of other questions for you. I will invite you back very soon because the situation with the tongue of Linden and by extension Region 10, it is not good at all. And this regime doesn't mean well for the people of Guyana, and more so they just don't mean well for the people of Region 10. Let me take the opportunity also to congratulate you, and I'll make this public. You have one beautiful daughter.
No.
One beautiful daughter you do have. So let me just extend that. I thought it was her birthday coming up, so my apologies. I thought it was, but you did say that it wasn't her birthday, and my fault. My fault on that in saying a happy birthday to your daughter when in fact it's not her birthday. That was months ago. But let me also say to you, Mr. Solomon, that I appreciate the fact that you have taken time out of your busy schedule to be here. Tomorrow happens to be a holiday in Guyana. Eidu, what is it? Eid, right? Yeah. Happy Eid.
Eid al-Adha.
Yeah, and all of our Muslim brothers and sisters. Salaam alaikum, sir.
Wa alaikum assalam, Mark, and thank you for having me on your program. Have a blessed rest of the evening.
Thank you so much. And to all of our listeners, thank you all as well. I'll see you back on Thursday because tomorrow Ganesh Mahipal will be on. Tomorrow, I'll be back on Thursday. God bless you. And God bless our beautiful country.
That little ditty we used to torment our teachers with when we were kids goes something like this. Onward, upward, Mary had a go. Day by day she tied it to a rope, till at length the goat bust the rope, and Miss Mary had to run behind it. We had a lot of fun with that, but do you actually know how beautiful these words are? Here's the Song of Guyana's Children by W. Hawley Bryant. Born in the land of the mighty Roraima, land of great rivers and far-stretching sea, so like the mountains, the sea, and the river, great, wide, and deep in our lives would we be. Onward, upward, may we ever go. Day by day in strength and beauty grow, till at length we each of us may show what Guyana sons and daughters can be.
It's hard to be at peace with the ones who are so discard. It's hard. Them have a knife in your back and them smile it so broad. Help me to deal with the ones them who said them love me when them really don't. Help me to deal with the fans them kill me flesh when the crowd are shout. Jesus, help me on the battlefield. Jesus, help me on the battlefield. Help me on the battlefield. Cause the booby traps with them set is real. I never want to take your glory, Lord. send your angels to encamp around about me and stand guard. To envy is so easy and to love it is so hard. Let me work for your glory and not for the award. Don't make me ever get caught up in the scream and the applause. And go talk about the blessing and not talk about the Lord. All these things are vanity, I need your reward. Let me be real, don't put on no facade. Help me to deal with the ones them who said them love me when them really don't. Help me to deal with the fans them. Give me flesh when the crowd are shout. Jesus, help me on the battlefield. Jesus, help me on the battlefield. Help me on the battlefield. God, the booby traps with them set is real. Sticks and stones can break my bones and words can harm me. They can harm me. When the evil come against me, you'll protect me. You'll protect me. Father, I need the strength of your son. Cause you know my work is not done. Lord, I need that endurance just to finish this race that I run. Help me to deal with the ones them who said them love me when them really don't. And help me to deal with the fans them. Kill me flesh when the crowd are shout. Jesus, help me on the battlefield. Jesus, help me on the battlefield. Help me on the battlefield. God, the booby traps with them set is real. You tell me if it's stand firm, cause every little plan you have a confirm. I know them evil plan turn. In a darkness, me a the lantern. So help me to deal with the ones that who said them love me when them really don't. Jesus, help me to deal with the fans them. Kill me flesh when the crowd are shout. Help me on the battlefield. Jesus, help me on the battlefield. Help me on the battlefield. God, the booby traps with them set is real. Help me to deal with the ones them who said them love me when them really don't. Help me to deal with the fans them. Kill me flesh when the crowd are shout. Jesus, help me on the battlefield. Jesus, help me on the battlefield. Help me on the battlefield. God, the booby traps with them set is real. Help me to deal with the ones them who said them love me when them really don't. Help me to deal with the fans them.